Our story begins when he was only 10 years old, the moment his father died in a tragic accident. Back then, the lawyer asked him a life-altering question: stay with his mother or take the 200 million his father had left behind. In his previous life, he had cried and begged for his mother, but she simply took the pension and married the neighbor, Juan. Or rather, it was Uncle Zhao. He always gets those details mixed up. He became a burden to them and eventually died of exhaustion on a construction site. He died at 28. Looking back at that sad, almost ridiculous life, he realized he had been completely foolish. Now, returning to that same crossroads of fate, we see this woman weeping inconsolably, wailing about how her husband could leave her like this. She cries out, asking how she and her poor orphan son are supposed to survive without him. She sobs heart-wrenchingly, her body appearing to crumble like soft mud in her grief. If it weren't for the people holding her up, she looked as though she might collapse at any moment. In his past life, he was utterly deceived by this performance. He truly believed she was heartbroken. He thought she couldn't live without him, so he threw himself at her feet, hugging her and begging to stay by her side. And what was the result? She took every cent of the pension he had been granted. The money his father had paid for with his very life was hers, and in less than 3 months, she was happily remarried. She married Zhao Qian, the man she always claimed was just looking out for the family. His father's ashes hadn't even grown cold before that man moved right into their home. He slept in the new bed where his father used to rest, while the boy became a nuisance, a burden that shouldn't have existed. Zhao Qian had a son 2 years older who saw him as a thorn in his side, and Li Lan, to please her new stepson, would beat and curse the boy without mercy. The fortune his father left behind became the capital for their enjoyment. It became a fun for the stepson to show off and spend, while he had to collect trash just to scrape together his tuition. He didn't even finish high school before they sent him off to work, claiming boys need independence, leaving him to haul bricks for 10 long years. Finally, due to extreme overwork, he collapsed onto a pile of red-hot steel rods and never woke up again. But now, we see he has returned. Li Lan takes him by the hand and tells him not to be afraid. She promises to take good care of him from now on, clutching him tightly to her side. She covers his face with tears and grief, but deep down, something else is hidden in her eyes. It was a flicker of urgency and greed, barely perceptible, but certainly there. Seeing this, he doesn't cry or scream as he did in his previous life. He remains perfectly still. He simply watches her performance with cold detachment until his father's friend and lawyer, Uncle Zhou, approaches. Lawyer Zhou sighs, patting him on the shoulder before pulling a document from his briefcase regarding Ning He's will. The lawyer's voice is unusually grave as he prepares to read the final wishes of the deceased. It seems Ning He had considered every possible situation, leaving behind an estate worth 200 million. The document had already been notarized, and now there were only 2 options left to consider. First, Xiao Ji stays with his mother, and this money, as a pension and child support, will be managed by her. She would control it until Xiao Ji comes of age. Hearing this, Li Lan's breathing quickens instantly. Her eyes shine with a terrifying light, fixed intently on that legal document. The second option is that if Xiao Ji chooses not to stay, the money moves to a trust managed by the lawyer. In that case, Xiao Ji would have the right to be represented and protected by lawyer Zhou. The boy would be under the direct legal care of the trusted family friend. Everything would be handled by lawyer Zhou himself. The boy would have the right to choose the lawyer's protection over his mother's. The decision rested entirely on the shoulders of lawyer Zhou and the young boy's choice. Xiao Ji would have the right to choose lawyer Zhou as his legal representative. What did you say? Her voice is so sharp it seems to pierce the eardrums. He repeats it calmly, without raising his voice, but with words that strike like nails. He doesn't want her. She wants the money. Li Lan screams that he's crazy, calling him an ungrateful son and reminding him she's his mother. Li Lan loses control completely, lunging like a harpy and raising her hand to slap him. But her wrist was caught by a large hand. It was lawyer Zhou who held her back. With a somber expression, he tells her, Li Lan, please, calm down. They are standing before Ning He's altar, and this is Xiao Ji's own decision. She snaps back, asking what a child could possibly know, certain that the lawyer must have instigated this. Lawyer Zhou, with a look of clear distaste, lets go of her hand and speaks. He repeats that this is Ning He's legally valid will, and Xiao Ji has made his choice. He informs her that he will be starting the corresponding legal proceedings immediately. From this moment on, she is no longer the boy's legal guardian. Li Lan stood there completely stunned, looking at him with a gaze full of resentment, as if seeing a mortal enemy. She likely couldn't understand how her son, always so submissive, had suddenly become so strange and cold. He didn't bother paying her any more attention, instead pulling on lawyer Zhou's sleeve to ask a question. Uncle Zhou, did Dad already know? The lawyer gave a sudden, startled look. He knelt down and looked the boy straight in the eye, and after a long moment, he nodded sadly. His father was an intelligent man, he says, and he loved his son very much. Those words caused the boy's eyes to redden instantly, and who could blame him, really? Yes, his father had been a truly intelligent man. He couldn't have missed Li Lan's frivolity. He had simply been holding back all that time just to give the boy a complete home. That was, until he was diagnosed with a terminal illness and realized his time was running out. And so, he carefully prepared this escape route for his son. In his previous life, he felt he had been far too foolish. He had destroyed his father's final act of love with his own hands. But in this life, he won't make the same mistake. He chooses the 2 billion. In the end, Lilan was dragged away by the relatives. The venomous look she gave him as she left was something he would keep engraved in his heart forever. But it didn't matter to him at all. From the second he made his decision, the maternal bond between them was broken. The only thing remaining was hatred. Lawyer Zhou became his new guardian, a man of integrity and trust. After the funeral, Lawyer Zhou took him to live at his own home. He showed him a long list of investments, all of them projects his father had studied alongside him. But the boy skipped directly to the last page, asking Uncle Zhou to sell everything listed before it. Lawyer Zhou was surprised, explaining that these were all blue-chip stocks. They had been selected under Li Lan's name, and those stocks were the ones he liked most. Lawyer Zhou became his new guardian, proving himself to be an upright and reliable man. After the funeral, the lawyer took over his care. The old bond was shattered, leaving only the projects his father had planned. However, he went straight to the final page and asked Uncle Zhou to sell off all the previous assets. Lawyer Zhou became his new guardian, as the boy's world as he knew it had completely broken apart. Every single one of them was a project his father had carefully studied alongside him. Selected under Li Lan's name, those stocks were his favorites, but Lawyer Zhou, now his new guardian, watched as the boy's world simply fell apart. They were all projects his father had studied with him, specifically chosen under Li Lan's name. To be honest, those were the exact stocks he liked the most. Every project had been vetted by his father, and though they were under Li Lan's name, they were the investments he favored above all others. In his previous life, he had worked himself to death. In this life, he simply wants to live in total comfort. He asked Lawyer Zhou to find him the best private school, not to study hard, mind you, but just for the pleasant atmosphere. And, of course, for the excellent cafeteria food. He even began exercising, solely to ensure he'd have perfect abs and a swimmer's build in the future. To live well, he began studying the 8 great cuisines of China and even learned the art of making his own wine. He wasn't training to be a chef, you see, he just wanted to satisfy his own personal cravings. He left every complicated problem in the capable hands of Lawyer Zhou. And by extension, he left them to the professional team his father had meticulously built for him. Their leader was Lao Wu, a Wall Street elite whom he hired by offering triple his usual salary. He had only one requirement for him: don't bother me, solve problems yourself, and if you can't, just let the company go bankrupt. Lao Wu looked at him, then as if he were staring at the foolish, wasteful son of a wealthy landlord. But he followed his orders faithfully, and so his life became a cycle of, "Boss, the 10-cent stocks have tripled again. We just made 50 billion. I know," he would reply. "Don't bother me. I'm busy doing research. Researching how to cook." Buddha jumps over the wall. That is, "Boss, Alibaba is about to go public." It was estimated that the value of their initial shares would exceed 1,000 billion. "I know," he said calmly. "Now come and try this new batch of yellow wine I've just finished making." "Boss, that land you bought at random last time? The government plans to turn it into the central business district of the new zone." Its value had multiplied 100-fold, and Lao Wu was slowly getting used to his boss's incredibly relaxed state of mind. He even began, on his own initiative, to filter out those small deals involving only a few measly billions. Meanwhile, our protagonist continued further and further down the path of doing absolutely nothing at all. His wealth was growing like a snowball, rolling downhill at an uncontrollable and frantic pace. But he had become numb to the numbers. He was only interested in how to make his life more comfortable. In time, he became something of a mysterious legend within the inner circles of the world's billionaires. No one knew who he was, only that there existed a mysterious Mr. Neen, a man as wealthy as an entire nation. Yet, he never allowed himself to be seen. That is, until he turned 18 and a certain woman appeared. She was the one who finally shattered his peaceful life of leisure. Her name was Xiao Banqin, his ex-fiancée. The engagement between the two of them, between Xiao Banqin and himself, was an old childhood arrangement made by his grandfather. After his father's death, the family's influence had declined, and for a long time, no one mentioned the marriage again. But no one imagined that the inheritance his father left behind would, 10 years later, transform into a vast commercial empire. Even though he maintained a very low profile, the sudden resurgence of his family's fortune was hard to miss. Eventually, it caught the undivided attention of the Xiao family. So, on the day of his 18th birthday, the Xiao patriarch and his prized granddaughter came to visit him in person. They arrived under the pretext of finally fulfilling that long-standing commitment from years ago. He met Xiao Banqin for the very first time right there, in the living room of Lawyer Zhou's house. She wore an elegant white skirt suit, with her long hair pulled back impeccably into a neat bun. Her face was adorned with subtle, delicate makeup, the picture of grace and calculated poise. She was beautiful, yes, but like an iceberg, radiating a frigid aura that kept everyone at a distance. She was the perfect stereotype of a businesswoman, raised specifically to be the heir to her clan. Rational, powerful, and cold. Word was that by age 20, she had already earned a double doctorate. At 22, she took the reins of the family business, ruling it with an iron fist. She commanded respect even among the most cunning foxes of the corporate world. Her world consisted only of business, interests, and data. To her, feelings were nothing more than the most useless of weaknesses. "Are you Ning Yi?" she asked, sitting across from him with her legs crossed as her gaze scanned him. She looked him up and down with an evaluation that was clearly filled with contempt. He had just returned from the gym, wearing a baggy tracksuit with his hair still damp from sweat. He answered lazily, leaning back on the sofa while picking up an apple and taking a bite. His casual attitude clearly annoyed her, causing her to knit her brows in slight frustration. "I heard you stopped studying after high school," she questioned. Studying is just far too exhausting," he replied. When she asked what he did now, he mentioned exercise, cooking, and making wine. He told her quite sincerely that he was researching how to be more comfortable while lying down. At that, a mocking smile played across Xiao Banqing's lips. "So, you're just an idle parasite with no job or purpose? You could look at it that way," he said, shrugging his shoulders with complete indifference. She let out a cold laugh, the disdain in her eyes growing even more intense. "Ning Yi, let's be clear," she began. "This engagement is a joke from our grandfathers and shouldn't be taken seriously." She continued, asserting that the husband of Xiao Banqing must be a strong man who can actually stand at her level. "And so?" he asked, looking at her with a sudden flicker of genuine interest. "So, I want you to go to my grandfather yourself and cancel this engagement," she declared. She spoke with the tone of someone giving an order, adding that as compensation, she could give him a sum of money. Or perhaps, she suggested, she could assign him a quiet, effortless position within her company. He nearly choked on his bite of apple. To give him money and a job? The irony was almost too much. Did she have any idea that the Xiao Group, which she felt so proud of, didn't represent even a fraction of his wealth? It seemed she was completely unaware that her entire family empire was a drop in the bucket compared to his resources. To be perfectly honest, her offer of a quiet position was the most absurd thing he had heard all day. As he leaned in, she instinctively wanted to pull back, but her body suddenly went rigid under his gaze. He could smell her cold, sharp perfume as he lowered his voice, so only she could hear. "I want you to go tell your grandfather yourself. Tell him that you are not worthy of me, Ning." At those words, Xiao Banqing's pupils contracted violently. In all her life, she had probably never heard words so incredibly arrogant directed toward her. She pushed him away with force and stood up, her face flushing a deep red with pure, unadulterated anger. "Ning Yi, do not be ungrateful," she hissed, her composure finally beginning to crack. She told him quite bluntly that he clearly didn't realize what was good for him. "Respect is earned, it isn't a gift," he replied calmly, sitting back down on the sofa as if nothing had happened. Crossing his legs, he looked up at her. "Miss Xiao, you were the one who chose to look down on me first. And is that not the truth?" She snapped back, looking down at him with a gaze full of icy superiority. "Someone like you," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Aside from being born lucky, what else can you actually do?" She accused him of spending his entire day doing absolutely nothing, essentially just vegetating away. She asked what the difference was between him and a parasite, but he simply replied that he quite liked his lifestyle. He extended his hands in a relaxed gesture, making it clear that he was the one who decided how to live his life. He wasn't like certain people, he noted, who lived like precise machines, calculating even their own joy and sadness. His words clearly struck a nerve, though to him, he was simply stating the obvious. Her face turned several shades paler as she clenched her fists in a silent, trembling rage. He remarked that those who follow different paths simply cannot share the same goals. "I will cancel the engagement," she declared. "From this moment on, we will have nothing to do with one another." With that final word, she turned around and walked away without offering him a single backward glance. Her proud back reminded us of a white swan, one that, even in a moment of defeat, refuses to be humbled. A moment later, Lawyer Zhou emerged from the study, his expression clouded with deep concern. "Xiaoyi, don't you think you've been a bit too impulsive?" he asked, clearly worried about the fallout. He reminded the young man that the Xiao family wields an immense amount of power within the capital. But Ning Yi told Uncle Zhou not to worry, noting that she was the one who wanted to break their shared path. After all, he wasn't the one who had chased her away, she had made her own choice. Besides, he mused, what kind of future could someone have if they couldn't even decide on their own marriage? He watched the direction where Xiao Banqing had disappeared, his eyes devoid of even a single spark of emotion. In his previous life, she had been like the bright moon in the sky, someone he felt he didn't even deserve to look upon. But in this life, standing before his eyes, she was nothing more than a poor soul trapped by the weight of her own family. Deep down, she was likely waiting to see him collapse in despair after their confrontation. It would have been quite a sight, to be sure, but the scandal of the broken engagement settled quickly. Xiao Banqing was true to her word, and within a few days, the Xiao family officially announced the dissolution of the engagement. As for Ning Yi, he was perfectly delighted with the peace and quiet, continuing his life as a professional slacker. Old Wu's phone calls continued to arrive with clockwork punctuality every single day. He was constantly reporting just how many small objectives and profits they had managed to secure. By now, his personal fortune had ballooned into a terrifying figure that he didn't even bother to calculate anymore. Despite his wealth, he still wore cheap tracksuits and drove a perfectly ordinary, unremarkable car. His days were spent simply drifting back and forth between the gym and the local market. Until one day, in a pastry shop that was just about to close, we see him encounter an angel. The shop was tucked away at the very end of a narrow alley in the old part of town. It was a small place, decorated in an old-fashioned style, selling traditional Chinese desserts that the world had almost forgotten. He found himself drawn in by a handwritten wooden sign hanging right at the entrance. It advertised the daily special, steamed rice flour cake with osmanthus and caramelized sugar. This happened to be the very dessert his father loved to make most when he was just a child. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, greeted by the crisp, clear chime of wind bells. There, he saw a young woman dressed in a pale green qipao. She emerged from the kitchen with long hair reaching down to her waist and not a trace of makeup on her face. A look of mild surprise crossed her features, and in that moment, his heart skipped a beat. It was a very strange sensation. She didn't possess the aggressive, striking beauty of someone like Xiao Banqin. She was like a crystal-clear spring, pure, simple, and utterly refreshing. Just looking at her brought a sense of peace. He asked if they still had the osmanthus rice flour cake. As he spoke, he noticed his own voice sounded a bit hoarse, perhaps from the sudden wave of nostalgia. The girl stood there stunned for a moment, before offering him a tender, genuine smile. It was like a spring breeze caressing a lake, sending soft ripples across the surface. She confirmed they did and kindly asked him to take a seat. She promised to go get it right away, her voice sounding just as pleasant as her expression. It was soft and sweet. He took a seat at a small table right by the window. A moment later, she returned with a plate of delicate pastries and placed them right in front of him. The cakes were beautifully shaped like tiny plum blossoms. They were adorned with crystalline caramelized osmanthus, giving off a sweet, tempting aroma. He took a bite and realized immediately this was the exact flavor his father used to create. A sudden warmth rose from the depths of his heart, and he felt his eyes grow moist. She sat across from him, resting her chin in her hands as she watched his reaction. He sat there with a sense of wonder, sincerely praising the dessert as excellent. He told her it tasted just like his father's, which seemed to surprise and delight her. Her eyes lit up as she explained that the recipe had been passed down to her by her grandmother. Apparently, her grandmother used to say that almost no one knows how to make it properly anymore. He remarked that her grandmother must have been an incredible person, and she beamed with pride. She introduced herself as Senjuchu, the proud owner of this little shop. "And what about you?" He introduced himself as Ninji, and soon they were chatting as if they were old friends. And so we learned that she comes from a family of culinary tradition. Her ancestor was actually an imperial chef. The young woman grew up immersed in these traditional arts, and since she hated the corporate grind, she opened her own little shop. Her only goal, it seemed, was to pass on these wonderful, ancient flavors. Her values were surprisingly similar to his own, as they both shared a deep love for a quiet, peaceful life. They also shared an almost stubborn devotion to traditional culture, which, naturally, made them a perfect match for conversation. He stayed in that little pastry shop all afternoon, talking with her for a long, pleasant while. The sunlight filtered through the window frames, bathing her in a soft, golden halo. He watched her bright eyes as she spoke with such passion. And those adorable, unconscious smiles of hers, well, they were hard to ignore. It felt as though a void somewhere deep in his heart was finally being filled. Suddenly, he felt his heart, once aged and hardened by the trials of rebirth, beginning to soften once again. From that day on, Senjuchu's pastry shop became his new sanctuary. He went every single day, sometimes to try a new dessert she had created, or perhaps to sip tea she had brewed herself. More often than not, he simply sat there, quietly watching her as she worked. She was always very busy, as she handled every single detail of the shop entirely on her own. Preparing ingredients, crafting the sweets, serving customers, and cleaning, she did it all herself. But she never complained, always keeping a look of pure satisfaction on her face. Eventually, he began to help her, first by washing dishes, then peeling vegetables, and a little later, she even allowed him into her kitchen to watch the delicate process of making the pastries. Her kitchen wasn't exactly large, but it was perfectly organized, with every utensil placed with meticulous care. Whenever she worked, she was completely focused, lost in her own world of creation. She was like a devoted artist, and we see how her slender hands transformed common ingredients into something more. He set down a heavy sack of rice, turned around, and, with a bit of mischief, puffed out his chest. He wondered if she'd like to see how it felt, assuming she would blush and run, but she actually reached out. Her fingertips were cool, carrying the faint, sweet scent of glutinous rice as they gently brushed against his firm abdomen. She looked as though she had discovered an entirely new world, her eyes widening in genuine surprise. His composure crumbled instantly as a sudden, burning heat rushed from his stomach straight to his head. He had lived 2 entire lives, yet this was the very first time a girl had ever provoked such a reaction. Looking at her innocent, curious expression, he truly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He caught her mischievous little hand, noting how soft it felt, almost as if it had no bones at all. He lowered his voice and leaned toward her ear. Her face turned bright red, like a ripe apple, and she pulled away. Without a word, she turned on her heel and went running out of the kitchen. He watched her retreating back as she fled and simply couldn't help but let out a laugh. She really was adorable, and we see their relationship warming up bit by bit through these quiet, everyday moments. They had endless things to talk about, from fine food and winemaking to kunku opera and the guqin. He discovered that she was like a hidden treasure, constantly surprising him with something new. She could play the guzheng, she was skilled in ink wash painting, and she could even play the piano. She seemed like a lady from another era, radiating a classic charm that touched everything she did. When he was with her, he felt as though the entire world finally decided to slow down. Everything became peaceful and beautiful. His heart, which had once only cared for finding his mother, finally began to settle. Whenever he lay down to rest, his mind would stir, and he found himself looking forward to seeing her every single day. He lived for her smile, their playful arguments, and those little, unconscious gestures she made without even realizing it. He even began to think that having her by his side every day in the future wouldn't be such a bad thing at all. He gave her dessert shop a special name, his Imperial Kitchen, while she, in turn, gave him a nickname of his own. She teased him, saying he did nothing but show up to collect the rent. And, of course, that he shamelessly hoarded all the most delicious desserts she ever made. Deep down, he knew there was only a thin veil left between them, waiting to be torn away. As it turned out, it was an accident that finally broke the tension. It happened on a day when a wealthy young man arrived in a flashy sports car. He walked into the shop and set his sights on Senjuchu almost instantly. With a greasy look and frivolous words, he brazenly offered to buy out the entire shop. His only condition was that Senjuchu accompany him. She, quite naturally, refused him on the spot. The rich man's son, now both furious and embarrassed, didn't take the rejection well. He began to cause a scene in the shop, smashing things and making a complete mess of the place. Our protagonist was right there in the kitchen, focused on studying a brand new recipe. The moment he heard the commotion, he came rushing out to see what was happening. He had been deep in his work, but the sound of the struggle pulled him away instantly. He saw the shop in shambles and Senjuchu's face, pale with fear, which was more than he could bear. An uncontrollable rage ignited within him. In 2 entire lifetimes, he had never felt this angry. He stepped directly in front of Senjuchu, casting a cold, piercing gaze at the wealthy young man. "Get out of here," the man spat back. "Who the hell are you to stick your nose in my business?" The rich man's son pointed a finger at him with an air of supreme arrogance, which was a mistake. Our protagonist said nothing. He simply pulled out his phone and dialed Old Wu. "Old Wu, find a license plate for me. I need it in 5 minutes." Make him, his business, and his entire family's company vanish from the capital. The wealthy heir stood stunned for a moment before bursting into a fit of mocking laughter. "I'm dying of laughter here. Do you actually think you're in some kind of movie? You're going to make my family disappear in 5 minutes? Do you even know who my father is?" He looked back calmly, as if staring at a dead man. In less than 3 minutes, the wealthy young man's phone began to ring. He answered it, and we see the arrogant smile on his face freeze instantly. What are you saying? The company accounts have all been frozen. Every single partnership has been canceled? How is that even possible? Who? Just who have we offended?" His voice was now trembling with pure terror. Finally, he collapsed to his knees with a heavy thud, the phone slipping from his nerveless fingers. He looked up at our protagonist as if he were a monster, his lips quivering uncontrollably. He couldn't manage a single word. "Can you leave now?" he asked with chilling indifference. The man practically crawled out, leaving even his flashy sports car behind in his haste to escape. Calm returned to the shop, and Senjuchu watched him, her eyes filled with surprise and a touch of admiration. He turned toward her with a gentle gaze and, with great tenderness, began to dry her eyes. As he wiped the tears from her face, he whispered that she shouldn't be afraid because he was right there. And then, without waiting for her to even process what was happening, he leaned down and softly kissed Senjuchu's cold lips. They were as soft as he had imagined, carrying the faint, sweet scent of osmanthus candy. At first, she froze like a startled fawn, but slowly, she began to relax and respond to him, however awkwardly. It was a light, superficial kiss, yet it felt like an electric current surging straight through his heart. After a long moment, he finally let her go, though he did so quite reluctantly. She lowered her head immediately, her face flushing a red so deep it looked as if it might bleed. She didn't dare look at him, so he gently lifted her chin to meet his gaze. Making sure she looked him in the eye, he asked her with absolute sincerity if she would be his girlfriend. She bit her lip, her long eyelashes fluttering nervously like the wings of a butterfly. After what felt like an eternity, she finally let out a tiny, soft hum of agreement, barely louder than a mosquito. He couldn't help but smile like a fool as he pulled her into a tight, protective embrace. In that moment, he felt as if he held the entire world. After living 2 lives, he was finally experiencing it. He finally understood what true emotion and real happiness actually felt like. Resting in his arms, she eventually spoke up, her voice muffled against his chest. She confessed that he had seemed quite terrifying just a moment ago, and he wondered if he had truly scared her. She couldn't wrap her head around how a single phone call could make an entire company collapse. She looked at him, searching for answers, and asked, "Ningi, who are you really?" Looking into those clear, innocent eyes, he realized he could no longer keep the truth hidden from her. "I've already told you," he said softly. "I'm just a wealthy landowner living a very relaxed life." He playfully tapped her nose, adding that he simply happened to own quite a lot of land. He began to tell her his story, selectively, of course, carefully omitting the secret of his rebirth. He explained that his father had left him a substantial inheritance, and with those funds, he had made a few strategic investments and earned what he called a little bit of money. Senjuchu blinked in disbelief. A little bit of money? To be honest, that was quite an understatement. Was it really just a little if it could make an entire company go bankrupt in 5 minutes? She wondered exactly how much that was, so he thought for a moment to find a comparison she could understand. Well, he told her, he could probably buy tens of thousands of dessert shops just like hers. Senjuchu gasped, counting on her fingers for a long while before looking at him with pure astonishment. When she asked if he was truly that wealthy, he simply nodded, leaving her in a stunned silence. Deep down, his heart felt a bit restless and uneasy as he waited for her reaction. He feared that the massive gap in their wealth might cause her to pull away from him. He didn't expect that, after a long silence, she would suddenly look up at him with such a serious expression. "Ningy, listen to me carefully," she declared. "From now on, your money is my money. And my money is still my money." He was stunned for a second, then burst into a fit of laughter. He swept her up into his arms, spinning her around and around right there on the spot. "All right then," he agreed. "I'll do whatever you say, my dear manager of Yuzenfan." Dizzy from the spinning, she could only cling to his neck, her bright laughter ringing out like silver bells. Deep down, he knew he hadn't chosen the wrong person, for he loved Senjuchu simply as a man loves a woman. He loved her for who she was, not for the halos of wealth surrounding him, and since they'd been together, his relaxed life had become truly colorful. Together they would research new desserts, and together they would ferment new batches of wine. She would take him to the morning market, where he found himself heatedly arguing with vendors over a single penny. In return, he took her to dine at 3-star Michelin restaurants so she could taste flavors from all around the world. She enjoyed touching his abs, playfully remarking that they felt quite firm, like a washboard, in fact. He, on the other hand, loved to kiss her neck and watch her cheeks flush red from the sudden shiver. Like any couple deeply in love, they shared many sweet, quiet nights together. Old Gu, watching all of this, often joked that he was practically choking on how much dog food or public displays of affection he had to witness daily. "Boss, here it is," the old man said. "The acquisition case for the Huangyu Group. It needs your signature." He told him to just leave it there, as he was busy making a steamed pear with syrup for Yuchu first. "Boss, this is the invitation to the dinner with the European royalty," Old Gu continued. He told him to cancel it. He was going to accompany Yuchu to see the new movie that had just been released. "Boss, the president of the Xiao Group, Mr. Xiao, would like to request a meeting with you." He wanted to discuss a potential partnership, and as Old Gu mentioned President Xiao, he looked at his boss with a certain caution. His hand paused for a brief moment, for the name Xiao Banking was one he hadn't heard in a very long time. He asked with an air of indifference exactly what it was the man wanted from him. Old Gu explained that the Xiao Group was having recent cash flow problems and was in urgent need of a massive investment. They had heard of their firm, Yifun Finshuan, and were hoping to seek out a cooperation. Yifun Finshuan was, of course, the investment company he had instructed Old Gu to establish. It was also, as it happens, the most insignificant corner of his vast business empire. But even so, for the Xiao Group, this tiny corner was a giant they were forced to look up to. Truly, the wheels of fortune turn. That ice queen who once looked down on him now came to beg for an investment. A mocking smile formed on his lips at the thought. He told Old Gu that if she wanted to talk, she would have to come personally to his imperial kitchen. This imperial kitchen was, of course, simply Yochu's dessert shop. Old Gu stood there for a moment, looking quite bewildered by the request. He insisted she bring her proposal so they could see just how sincere she really was. He wanted to see the look on her face when Xiao Banking finally saw him with Sun Yuchu. Imagine the scene. The useless man she once despised was now the very person she had to admire. He could only imagine what a wonderful expression that would be. With every passing moment, he grew more eager for the arrival of Xiao Banking. We find him later in the back kitchen, preparing the crab buns that Sun Yuchu loved most. He wore a white chef's jacket with an apron tied tight, his hands still dusted with flour. Sun Yuchu, acting like a playful kitten, hugged his waist from behind and stole a bit of steamed crab. At the same time, she playfully gave him orders, telling him to toss any bun where the fold wasn't pretty. She teased him, saying they only needed to look right, calling him a silly man. She declared the batch barely acceptable, giving it her official administrator's approval with a grin. He simply let her carry on with her mischief, occasionally turning his head to kiss her cheek. The kitchen was filled with the rich aroma of food and the sweet, quiet air of their shared happiness. It was at that very moment that Xiao Banking pushed open the door and stepped inside. She was dressed in a black office suit, her hair still impeccably styled, though her face betrayed a deep sense of exhaustion and anxiety. Even so, she made a visible effort to maintain her usual persona as the Ice Queen director. But when she looked toward the kitchen, she was left speechless. The scene before her caused her to freeze completely. She could never have imagined that the legendary, mysterious, and all-powerful owner of Yifun Suanfin was the same useless man she had once despised. Even less could she imagine that this man, now wearing an apron in the back of a small dessert shop, was personally cooking for a girl. And that girl, we notice, was acting with the clear air of someone claiming her territory. She hugged him with such intimacy that Xiao Banking's face turned pale in an instant. In her eyes, which were always so cold and rational, there appeared a mix of shock, confusion, and a hint of shame that she hadn't even noticed herself. He greeted her with total indifference, drying his hands and removing his apron as if he had only just noticed the director had arrived. Sun Yuchu poked her head out from behind him, watching Xiao Banking with a look of pure curiosity. She then asked him in a low whisper, "Ningyi, who is she?" She remarked that the woman looked very serious, like someone who had come to beg for a favor. He simply smiled and pinched her nose, which made Sun Yuchu break into a little laugh. At this, Xiao Banking's face shifted from white to green, and then from green to a deep, burning red. It was quite a colorful display. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug deep into her palms. Through gritted teeth, she managed to squeeze out a few words, telling Ning Yi not to push his luck. He merely raised an eyebrow, reminding the director that she was the one who had insisted they have nothing to do with each other. And yet, here she was, having come to find him entirely on her own initiative. If she wasn't there to beg for a favor, then what exactly was the point of her visit? He took Shin Yuchu by the hand and led her to a table outside, placing a steaming basket of buns right in front of her. He told her to try them while they were fresh, and then, very slowly, he turned his gaze toward the others. He looked at Xiao Banking and made a casual gesture for her to join them, inviting the director to take a seat. He asked her what business she had, his tone light and entirely unbothered. It was as if he were dismissing someone of no importance whatsoever. This was nothing like the high-stakes business negotiation she had envisioned in her head. There was no tension or sharp exchange of words, only a sense of crushing, total superiority on his part. Xiao Banking took a deep breath, forcing herself to regain some semblance of composure. She pulled out a chair, sat across from him, and pushed a thick file from her bag toward him. She addressed him as Mr. Ning, explaining that this was the Xiao Group's development plan for the next 5 years. She added that it included the financing outline for their current venture. She began to say what she hoped for, but he raised a hand to cut her off mid-sentence. He told Director Xiao that she seemed to have misunderstood the situation entirely. He pointed out that, at this moment, she was the one pleading with him. He leaned back in his chair and spoke quite leisurely, reminding her that the roles had reversed. He confessed he had no interest in her plan and only wanted to ask her a single question. He pointed first to Shun Yuchu at his side, and then back to himself. He asked if she thought they made a good couple, a question that made Xiao Banking's body tremble violently. She looked at him, and then at Shun Yuchu, who was happily eating her buns in small, blissful bites. Her lips moved, but she found herself utterly unable to utter a single word. A good couple? That question, sharp as a blade, pierced deep into her proud heart. The man before her was handsome, wealthy, and powerful, yet he was personally cooking for an ordinary girl. The tenderness in his eyes was a softness she had never seen before. And that girl, though dressed simply, had a clean smile and a gaze that was perfectly clear. She exuded the kind of quiet happiness that only comes from being truly enveloped in love. Sitting there together, they formed a picture of absolute peace, a scene from a much gentler time. She remembered standing before him, her tone condescending, telling him to leave her world forever. And now the tables had turned, leaving her with a bitter sense of irony and regret. It washed over her like a tide, shattering her pride and her composure in a single moment. With great difficulty, she finally opened her mouth, her voice sounding strained and hoarse. It hardly sounded like her own voice as she admitted they did, indeed, make a good couple. He smiled, noting that he seemed to recall someone saying something very different once. He reminded her of the claim that he was a useless parasite, entirely unworthy of her. The last trace of color drained from Xiao Banqin's face. She knew he was humiliating her now. He was simply returning her own words to her, exactly as she had spoken them. She called him Ning Yi, admitting she had been blind back. Then, while closing her eyes to gather strength, she offered an apology but insisted that business and personal matters should remain separate. She told him this cooperation was vital for the Su Group, practically begging him to reconsider. He interrupted her immediately, questioning the idea of her begging him, addressing her formally as Miss Xiao. "In what capacity are you begging me?" he asked. "As my ex-fiancé, or as a loser?" Shin Yuchu listened without understanding a word, but she was clever enough not to intervene. She simply placed a pork bun on his plate, supporting him silently with those crystal-clear eyes. That small gesture was the final blow. Xiao Banqin's defenses crumbled completely. She saw the unspoken bond between them, an intimacy that ran deep, something she could never have. She had always believed she was chasing the pinnacle of her career, yet she felt nothing. She realized that standing at the top, looking down on mortals, her heart was hollow and cold. She had won the whole world, but lost the only person who could have given her warmth. Xiao Banqin spoke again, her voice finally breaking as she began to sob. "I am begging you, all right?" she cried, her composure vanishing entirely. And here we see the impossible. The haughty, icy Xiao Banqin was actually weeping. Tears rolled down her delicate face and fell directly onto the document she held. The business plan she was so proud of was now being ruined by a growing damp stain. He watched her in silence, feeling not a single spark of satisfaction, only pure indifference. In his previous life, he might have softened at her tears, but that man was gone. He took the plan and, without even glancing at it, tossed it straight into the nearby trash can. "Miss Xiao," he said, standing up to look down at her with a cold finality. "I have absolutely no interest in acquiring a company that is already on the verge of bankruptcy." He questioned if she even truly owned the company she was trying so hard to save. With that, he stopped looking at her, took Shin Yochu's hand, and turned back toward the kitchen. Behind him, the sound of Xiao Banqin's uncontrollable sobbing echoed. She was completely undone. He knew that from this day forward, her pride had been crushed by his own hands, and this was only the beginning. Xiao Banqin left, utterly dejected, and he paid no more attention to her fate because someone even more repulsive had come looking for him. Lilan, his biological mother, appeared out of nowhere. She had somehow heard about Shin Yochu's pastry shop and planted herself directly at the entrance. It had been 10 years since they last met. She had aged significantly and looked quite haggard. The woman who once possessed a certain charm was now a shadow of her former self. Deep wrinkles now marked her face, especially around her eyes. Her hair was graying, and she wore cheap clothes. They were the kind of clothes one finds at a flea market, and her face reflected nothing but cunning and calculation. It was obvious at a glance that she and Zhao Qian were not having a very good time of it lately. In his previous life, they had squandered his father's money, and Zhao Qian had become addicted to gambling. They soon wasted the entire fortune, and in this life, without his father's money, things were surely even worse. As soon as she saw him, she lunged forward, trying to embrace him just as she had 10 years ago. With a look of pure repulsion, he stepped aside as she cried out, "Xiao Ning, my son, I've finally found you." And right on cue, she began her performance of loud wailing and dramatic lamentations. "If you have something to say, say it," he told her coldly, showing no emotion whatsoever. "If not, you can just keep crying." "Xiao Ning, how can you speak to your mother like that? I know you still hold a grudge." She told him that back then, she had her own difficulties to deal with, which, naturally, was her usual excuse. She claimed that she and his uncle Zhao had suffered through many terrible years together. Apparently, she was cheated in a business deal, and now they were in massive debt, without even enough to eat. "Xiao Ning, now that things are going well for you, you can't just turn your back on your own mother." As she wiped away her tears, she began to indulge in a heavy dose of self-pity. She made a dramatic show of trying to kneel, which only made him frown in disgust. We see Shun Yuchu stepping out of the shop, looking completely bewildered by the scene unfolding before her. "Ningyi, who is she?" she asked, to which he simply replied, "Someone of no importance." He gently moved Shun Yuchu behind him, wanting to shield her from this sordid display. Lilan shrieked, pointing a finger at Shin Yuchu, offended at being called unimportant. "I am his mother, his biological mother," she screamed for everyone to hear. "And who are you? Some tramp trying to seduce my son to get your hands on our money." Shin Yuchu's face turned pale at the insult, and his own expression darkened completely. He spoke each word slowly, his voice sounding as cold as ice. "I'm telling you one last time, get out of here. I'm not going anywhere. Ningyi, today, you are going to give me money." "A million? No, 10 million, she demanded, her greed finally showing its true face. "If you don't give it to me, I'll stay right here forever. Furthermore, I'll sue you. I'll sue you for abandoning your own mother." Lilan began to cause a massive scene, her behavior growing increasingly violent and erratic. She clearly thought he was still that same easily manipulated puppet who cared about his reputation. Did he care about the opinions of others? To be honest, she couldn't have been more wrong. He looked at that ugly, calculating face, and then, quite suddenly, he smiled. "Fine then," he said calmly. "You want to sue me? I'll give you that chance," he added, as he reached for his phone. He called Lao Wu again, asking him to contact the most prestigious legal team in the capital. And he didn't stop there. He wanted the biggest media outlets present for a press conference. The topic? Settling the score for all those years with his dear biological mother. Lilan stood there, utterly stunned. She never expected that instead of being intimidated, he would escalate the situation. "You wouldn't dare," she stammered, her voice fierce but betraying a deep insecurity. "You think I won't," he replied, putting his phone away with a sarcastic smile. He reminded her that she had surely forgotten what happened 10 years ago. Back then, he had chosen to walk away from her for money, and 10 years later, his resolve hadn't changed. He was perfectly willing to ruin her just to ensure his own peace of mind. "Since you love to perform," he told her, "I'll build you a stage." He promised her a much larger platform where she could act to her heart's content. His gaze was hollow, as if he were looking at something completely lifeless. Lilan felt a sudden chill, finally realizing that this son of hers was no longer someone she could control. To her, he seemed like a demon, someone far colder and more ruthless than she could have imagined. She pointed a trembling finger at him, but only managed to stutter a few incoherent words. And in the end, unable to withstand that immense pressure, she fled the scene in total disgrace. Finally, the world went quiet, and Shin Yuchu took Ning Yi's hand with deep concern. "Is she really your mother?" she asked, and he simply squeezed her hand in return. He kissed her hand and told her that, as of this moment, she was no longer his mother. From now on, he said, his only real family was her. Shin Yuchu looked at him, her eyes shimmering with tears of pure tenderness. She didn't ask another thing. She simply stood on her tiptoes and gave him a warm hug, telling him not to be afraid. She promised him that, from this day forward, he would always have her by his side. He assumed that after scaring Lilan off, she would finally give up, but he had clearly underestimated her sheer shamelessness. A few days later, an endless wave of negative news about him suddenly began to flood the entire internet. The headlines called the mysterious billionaire Ning a modern-day villain for marrying a wealthy heiress. They accused him of abandoning his poor mother, claiming to reveal the dark secrets behind the billionaire's history. The stories claimed he had sucked his own mother dry, featuring a grieving woman crying out for her lost son. Articles filled with resentment painted him as an ungrateful social climber, a son blinded by beauty and seduced by a temptress. In this narrative, Lilan was transformed into the long-suffering, impoverished mother abandoned by her own flesh and blood. Naturally, Shin Yuchu was cast as the villainous woman who had destroyed their sacred mother-son relationship. There were even stolen photos of the two of them circulating online. Images of them eating at a small street shop caused public opinion to explode as thousands of netizens fell for the lies. Manipulated by those sensationalist articles, the public began to savagely vilify him across every social platform. And so, his name appeared on the trending list for the very first time in this unfortunate manner. Some extreme users even went as far as doxing Shin Yuchu's dessert shop. They threw paint and trash at her door, screaming that she was nothing more than a shameless mistress. Shin Yuchu was so terrified by the hostility that she didn't dare open the shop for several days. She took refuge in his arms, weeping from a deep sense of helplessness. He held her close, feeling his own heart breaking for her. Through her tears, she whispered that she wasn't the person they were calling her. He assured her that he knew the truth and told her there was no need to be afraid. He promised to resolve everything, though the look in his eyes was now colder and more dangerous than ever. Lilan and Zhao Qian had truly managed to push him too far this time. Originally, he only wanted to leave them to their own devices, but they insisted on hurting the person he cared for most. In that case, he decided they could hardly blame him for being ruthless. He had Lao Wu investigate the matter, and it wasn't long before the results came in. Behind the entire smear campaign, just as we suspected, were Li Lan and Zhao Qian. They had hired a third-rate marketing firm to do their dirty work. They bought paid trolls and directed this entire theatrical production themselves. But the real surprise was discovering that Xiao Banqin was also lurking in the shadows. While she didn't participate directly, she certainly did her part to fan the flames. It was quite the lineup. On one side, his utterly shameless biological mother, and on the other, his bitter and dissatisfied ex-fiancée. Since they enjoyed conspiring together, he decided he would send them both down to ruin together. Strangely enough, he didn't rush to clarify the situation or delete the trending topics. Instead, he allowed public opinion to continue its wild growth. He wanted them to climb as high as possible, simply so their eventual fall would be much harder. 3 days later, across the entire internet, just as the condemnation against him reached its peak, he held the press conference he had prepared for Lilan. The venue was the largest banquet hall in the most exclusive 7-star hotel in the capital. He invited hundreds of national media outlets to witness what was about to unfold. The scale of the event was something never seen before, and he made sure to invite Lilan to the scene as well. She likely thought he was finally going to cave and give her the money to make the problem go away. She wore a smug, self-satisfied smile, and we see that Xiao Banqin had also arrived to watch the show. He gave her a reassuring smile, while the camera flashes went off like crazy all around them. He cleared his throat, standing before a sea of countless microphones and cameras. He spoke the first sentence. "Hello everyone, I am Ning Yi, and I have invited you here today." He told them he was there to tell a story about lessons, a very expensive one, to be honest. And so, he began to tell the story of when he was only 10 years old. He recounted exactly how it happened, from his father's will to the threats Lilan had made against him. Then came his final decision. He spoke with a chilling calm, without a single trace of emotion in his voice. It was as if he were narrating something that didn't concern him at all, which, in a way, made it even more powerful. But the entire hall fell into a deathly, sepulchral silence as he spoke. Every single journalist there sat in stunned silence, completely taken aback. They likely hadn't expected the truth to take such a shocking and dramatic turn. Lilan's face turned pale instantly, her smug confidence vanishing in a heartbeat. She tried to lunge forward to refute him, but the security guards he had stationed there held her firmly in place. Of course, words alone weren't going to be enough to settle this score. He snapped his fingers, and suddenly the massive screen behind him lit up and began playing a recording. It was from 10 years ago, captured during the somber atmosphere of the wake. We hear Lilan's voice whispering that threat into his ear. "If you dare to speak, I will kill you." "You are my son," she had said. "Your money is my money." The voice was crystal clear, recovered from a recording device that lawyer Zhou had been carrying at the time. His father had been a suspicious man in life, and as the recording played, the entire hall erupted in a frenzy. The journalist's flashes all turned toward Lilan, whose face had turned the color of ash. She began to scream hysterically, claiming that it was all a lie. She insisted it was manipulated, but he only smiled. A fake, she called it. Then is this a fake as well? He asked, as the image on the screen shifted once more. It began to play a video from less than a month after his father's passing. We see Lilan and Zhao Qian sitting together in a luxury restaurant. They were toasting with joy, and Zhao Qian told her, Lan, I told you so. That boy is a fool, he continued. He will surely choose you. She replied that she knew her son well, and once they had the 200 million, they would travel the world. They toasted to their beautiful future, while Ning Yi remained a quiet spectator to his own betrayal. Finally, the screen froze on a document, the formal declaration severing the mother-son relationship. He took the microphone, and his voice resonated through the hall as he made a formal declaration. He announced that, from this day forward, he was breaking all ties with Mrs. Lilan. From now on, whether in life or in sickness, they would be strangers. Marriage, funerals, nothing binds us anymore. Then, he turned his gaze toward Xiao Banqin, who was standing in a corner. Regarding all the people and entities who have maliciously defamed and slandered my fiancé, the ladies at Juchu, and myself, my legal team will demand full legal accountability, including from the Xiao Group's public relations firm. He believed it was entirely possible for them to be held responsible, starting with the tools used by the group's president. He couldn't focus on business ideas anymore. His voice was no longer cold, but filled with exhaustion and hoarseness as he spoke. Her first words were, I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness. I only want to ask if you would have stayed if I hadn't broken the engagement. He interrupted her without hesitation. Xiao Banqin, you have never entered my world, nor could you, because you never understood me. You only saw what you imagined, and from start to finish, I only wanted to be an ordinary man who cooks for the person he loves. The other end of the line fell into a long silence until a faint sound, like a breaking heart, was heard. He hung up, knowing she was gone. Perhaps she will rebuild her empire, but her world will always lack one piece: happiness. As for him, he had already found his. He turned off his phone and entered the kitchen, where Senjuchu was wearing the apron he bought her, humming as she made dumplings. Her face was covered in flour, and seeing him, she gave a wide smile. Come help, great landlord. Your head chef wants dumplings today. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating her face. He approached, hugged her from behind, and kissed her flour-covered nose. As you command, my queen. To him, wealth was mere vanity. He didn't care for the world's riches, only for the girl in his arms. He wanted to cook for her and see her smile for the rest of his life. He had used 200 million to cut ties with the past. But he never imagined that, in the end, what he would truly gain was the entire world, a world with her in it.